Okay, so we've been going through one paragraph of Nana, that's Who Am I, each month. And this month it's the fourth paragraph. So this is, there are many important things that Bhagavan teaches us in this paragraph about the nature of the mind, the nature of the world, the connection between the mind and the world, and clarifying what he had said in the previous paragraph. In the previous paragraph, he said, if the mind which is the cause for all knowledge, that's all knowledge of other things, all awareness of things other than itself, and all activity subsides, perception of the world will cease. Just as unless the perception of a rope will not occur unless perception of the illusory snake ceases, so also perception of Jagat Drishti, that means seeing of oneself or self-knowledge, true self-awareness, will not arise until perception of the world, which is imagination, ceases. So in this paragraph he explains this in much more detail. In the first sentence he says, Manam embadu Atmasrupatilula or Adiseya Shakti. That means what is called mind is an extraordinary power, an Adiseya Shakti, that exists in Atmaswarupa. Atmaswarupa means the real nature, well, literally Swarupa means own form, but it's used in the sense of real nature of oneself. So what is called mind is a wonderful power, an extraordinary power that exists in our real nature, in the real nature of ourself. As he said at the end of paragraph 2, our real nature is just awareness, and the nature of awareness is Satchidananda. So whatever seems to exist can exist only in Atmaswarupa, because it's one infinite whole. It's a pure awareness. In that pure awareness, the mind appears. The mind appears only in its own view. In the view of pure awareness, there is no mind. But the mind, this is why the mind is sometimes called Maya. Maya means that which is not, because it's an unreal thing that appears only in its own view. But the underlying base in which it appears is the pure awareness, which is our real nature. And the reason Bhagavan calls it an extraordinary power is because it makes all this appear. Without the mind, none of this would appear. In waking and dream, we perceive ourselves as a body, and we perceive numerous other phenomena, which we call the world. In sleep, we don't experience either a body or any other phenomena. The reason is in waking and dream, mind is present. In sleep, mind is absent. So mind is the cause for the appearance of all these things. This is what Bhagavan is clarifying in this paragraph. So as I say, in the first sentence he says, mind is a wonderful power that exists in Atmaswarupa. And in the next sentence he says, Adu sakala nene vugalam totrivikindradu. Which simply means it makes all thoughts. Okay, in the second sentence, Bhagavan says, Adu sakla nene vugalam galayum totruvikindradu. It makes all thoughts appear. That is, the mind makes all thoughts appear. The verb totruvikindradu, literally it means it causes to appear or makes appear. But in this is a verb Bhagavan often uses when he's talking about projection. So we can a little more freely translate it as it projects all thoughts. Because Bhagavan often uses the analogy of a cinema projector. So And then in the third sentence he says, Ninevugale ellam niki parkindra podu taniai manum endro porul ille. That means if we set aside, or if we look with removing all thoughts, solitary, there's no such thing as mind. Ahayal nineve manatin sarupam. Therefore, thought alone is the swarupa, the own form or very nature of the mind. So, Bhagavan first says the mind is a wonderful power, but then he analyzes it. What it is nothing but thoughts. Elsewhere, Bhagavan analyzes a bit more deeply. He says the mind is nothing but thoughts, but of all thoughts, the first thought is the thought I, that is the ego. So that is the root of all thoughts, because it is without I, the ego, the thinker, no other thoughts will exist. It is the first thought I, the ego, but is aware of all other thoughts. And therefore, what the mind essentially is only the first thought, I, the ego. But he doesn't, here he doesn't say that. He said that, he alludes to that later on in this same paragraph. So he's analysed the mind as that it's nothing but thoughts. And then in the next sentence he says, Ninevugale tabitu jagam endro porul anyamai ile. Excluding thoughts, there is not separately any such thing as world. So according to Bhagavan, the whole world, all these phenomena we see are nothing but our own thoughts. In a dream, we see a world full of people and so many activities, all these things. When we wake up, we recognize that it was all our own mental projection. It was all our own creation of our mind. It was nothing but thoughts, nothing but mental phenomena. According to Bhagavan, likewise, all this is nothing but thoughts or mental phenomena. When Bhagavan uses the term thoughts, he uses it in a much deeper and broader sense than the normal sense in which we use thoughts. People often talk about, oh, I was meditating and I was without thoughts for 5 minutes. What they mean, when we use thoughts in that context, we're just talking about mental chatter. When there's less mental chatter, we say we're without thoughts. But according to Bhagavan, the I who is meditating, the body that is sitting in meditation, the room in which it is sitting, all these are nothing but thoughts. So, except in sleep, we are never free of thoughts. We are never completely without thoughts, in the sense in which Bhagavan uses the term thoughts. Which is very important to understand, because later on in the 6th paragraph he said, for example, what does it matter however many thoughts appear? Whatever thought may appear, we should investigate to whom it appears, and thereby we should turn our attention back towards ourselves. So what Bhagavan means there by thought is not just the mental chatter. It means any awareness of any phenomena, anything that appears or disappears is a thought. And the root of all thoughts, the first thing to appear and disappear, is the ego, the first thought I. So to support this contention, to convince us of what he is saying is the truth, there's no world other than thoughts. He gives 2 more sentences. In the first of these, he says, "Tukatil ninevugalile jagamomile." That means in sleep there are no thoughts, and there is also no mind. Sorry, in sleep there are no thoughts, and there's also no world. That is, because the world is nothing but thoughts, in the absence of thoughts there's no world. That's the implication here. And then in the next sentence it says, in waking and dream there are thoughts, and there is also a world. So why the world appears in waking and dream? Because of the rising of the mind and all its thoughts. And then in the next sentence he gives an analogy to explain how the mind projects the world. Silindi puchi epidi tanir idamirindu beliil nule nutru marapadium tannol irtu kolkirdo. That's the analogy. That means just as a spider spins out thread from within itself and a grain draws it back into itself, appadiye manamum tan iditilirandu jagate totru vittu marapadium tan idame oduki kolkiradu. In the same way, the mind makes the world appear or projects the world from within itself and again dissolves it back into itself. And in the next sentence he says, Manam atmasarupa tinindru velipadum podu jagam tondrum. When the mind comes out from Atmasvarupa, the world appears. What he means by coming out of, he doesn't literally mean that coming out of, because there is no outside of Atmasvarupa. Atmasvarupa is the one infinite whole. But when the mind appears within Atmasvarupa, he metaphorically calls it the mind coming out from Atmasvarupa, the world appears. So when the mind rises, the world appears. When the mind subsides, as in sleep, the world disappears. Ahayal jagam tondram podu sarupam tondradu. Therefore, when the world appears, Swarupa, one's own real nature, does not appear. The reason for this is our own real nature is pure awareness. When awareness of anything, when the mind rises, awareness of other things comes into existence. That obscures our real nature, which is the pure self-awareness, awareness of nothing other than itself. So when the mind comes out from Atmasvarupa, when the mind rises from Atmasvarupa, the world appears. And therefore, when the world appears, our real nature does not appear. And in the next sentence he says, Sarupam tondrum prakasikam podu jagam tondradu. When Swarupa appears, and he puts in brackets prakasikam, which means shines, the world does not appear. The reason he puts shines here is when he says, when Swarupa appears, our real nature is not something that actually appears and disappears. It's only it seems to appear when the mind, it seems to disappear when the mind arises, because as the mind we're aware of our real nature is pure self-awareness. That's the pure awareness I am. But when we rise as mind, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, I am Michael, I am, and we're also aware of all other things. So this, the rising of the mind, in the view of the mind, conceals our real nature. So because our real nature is seemingly concealed by the rising of the mind, Bhagavan refers to when the mind doesn't. When the mind subsides, Swarupa appears, he says. And to make it clear that he's not meaning that it actually appears and disappears, he puts shines in brackets. Shines there means when we know ourselves as we really are, the world does not appear. That is the implication there. Up to here, he's clarifying what he had said in the previous paragraph, which is unless the mind subsides, unless the mind ceases to exist, our real Swarupa Darshanam, that's the awareness of our real nature, will not arise. Then the next sentence is quite Bhagavan expresses himself very cryptically here. He says, Manatin Sarupate Vicharitu Konde Ponal Tane Manamai Mudiyam. What that literally means is, if one goes on investigating the mind, oneself alone will end as mind. What exactly he means by oneself alone will end as mind, we have to think very deeply. In some of the earlier versions, this is the essay version of Nanya, which was written by Bhagavan himself. In some of the earlier versions that were what Shiv Prakashan Pillai had recorded, but it was different in different versions. But in some versions it was given as Maname Tanai Mudiyam, which means the mind alone will end as oneself. But when Bhagavan wrote it himself, he wrote Tane Manamai Mudiyam, which is a very cryptic way of saying it. Literally it means oneself will end as mind. The implied meaning is oneself alone will finally turn out to be what previously seemed to be the mind. Now it's a bit like saying the rope will end as the snake. That is, the rope will turn out to be what had previously appeared as the snake. That is the implication there. And what he means by oneself here, he clarifies in the next sentence, Tan embadu atmaswarupame. What is here called Tan, oneself, is only atmaswarupa. So the implication here is what appears as this mind, and consequently is all this world, is nothing but our own real nature. But so long as it appears as all this, we are not aware of ourselves as we really are. So long as we see the snake, we don't see the rope. When we see the rope, we don't see the snake. We can't see the same thing as a rope and as a snake simultaneously. We either see it as it is, or we see it as something else. And then the last few sentences of this paragraph, he tells us more about the nature of the mind. In the next sentence he says, Manam epodum or stulate anusarite nitkum. That means the mind stands only by always, the verb he uses is anusari, which means going after, following, conforming to, attaching itself to, attending to, or seeking. It's a word that, the essential meaning is going after, but the implied meaning is all these. So the mind stands only by always going after a stulum, that is something that is gross, namely a physical body. This is a way of saying that the mind never stands without grasping a body as I, as Bhagavan often said. Taniyai niladu, solitarily it doesn't stand. So the mind can never exist without being aware of itself as a body. But the body it is aware of is not always the same body. Now we experience this body as I. When we dream, it's not this body but we're experiencing as I, it's some other body. According to Bhagavan, whatever body we experience as I is a mental projection, but the mind cannot stand without projecting and experiencing a body as I. That is the implied meaning here. Maname sukshma sariram endram, jivam endram solupadakindradhu. The mind alone is described as sukshma sarira, the subtle body, and as jiva, the soul. Next month we'll go through the next paragraph where he continues this analysis of the nature of the mind. But that's this paragraph is a bridge between the third paragraph in which he's saying we can't know our real nature so long as the mind seems to exist, and the next paragraph where he analyzes the nature. So in the previous paragraph he said that if the mind subsides, perception of the world will cease, and but so long as there's perception of the world, we cannot be aware of ourselves as we actually are. And in the next paragraph, he analyzes the nature of the mind more. So this is a bridge between the two. He's explaining why we cannot be aware of ourselves so long as so long as the world appears. And he's also talking about the nature of the mind, which is nothing but thoughts. So all these what Bhagavan is saying in Nanya, most of these are very, very simple sentences, but they're full of very, very deep meaning. So we can go on. This is a text I've been reading Nanya for 40 years, and I still find so much wealth of meaning in it. And the deeper we go in the practice, the more meaning we can see in the simple words that Bhagavan uses here. And I mean, this one simple text of 20 paragraphs, it contains all that we really need to know to understand Bhagavan's teaching thoroughly. It's not the only text like that. Like Ulladu Narpadu is possibly an even more fundamental text, but all that Bhagavan says in Ulladu Narpadu is implied here in Nanya. In very, very simple terms he expresses it. And these were all teachings that Bhagavan gave when he was perhaps about 20, 21 years old. To Sri Prakashan Pillai, who came and asked him, Swami, who am I? From that, a series of questions ensued, and Bhagavan gave all these teachings at that time. Because Sri Prakashan Pillai, the questions he asked were very deep. Bhagavan gave very deep answers. We can read, volumes of books have been recorded of what Bhagavan said to questions asked by other people, but none of them compare to this, simply because the depth of the questions that Sri Prakashan Pillai was asking. In other books we can read people ask Bhagavan about all sorts of things. When they ask one question, Bhagavan gives an answer and they jump onto some other topic. They're not really questioning Bhagavan deeply, whereas Sri Prakashan Pillai really questioned Bhagavan deeply because he was really wanted to know the truth. And so, thanks to Sri Prakashan Pillai, we have this wonderful work, Nanya, which contains the very core of Bhagavan's teachings in very, very simple language. Before answering any questions that you may have, there's just one more thing I'd like to say about this paragraph and the previous one. What Bhagavan teaches us here is implied here and there in ancient texts, and it may even in a few places be stated a little bit, somewhat explicitly, but generally it's obscured by the prevalence of a lot of other more superficial teachings. So for many people who are familiar with Advaita teachings, what Bhagavan is teaching here will seem very revolutionary, and many people may not be willing to accept it. For example, one of the ideas that is you can find in a lot of older texts is the idea about Jiva Mukti and Videha Mukti. Jiva Mukti means liberation while in the body. Videha Mukti means liberation after when the body is separate from the body. Videha means that's when the body dies. What the liberation that remains after the death of the body is Videha Mukti or Videha Kaivalya. This concept is there in many books. So generally people believe in this idea of Jiva Mukti, and accordingly people think that if they follow this path and sincerely follow the path that Bhagavan has taught us, one day they will become self-realized, they will attain Jiva Mukti, and their life will continue, outward life will continue, they'll continue to be a person, continue to be acting in the world, but they'll have this wonderful state called self-realization. And because of this prevalent belief, nowadays we see so many, not only nowadays, this would be going on for hundreds of years, there are so many people who believe themselves to be self-realized. And they give teachings, and some of them may be deliberately trying to dupe other people. Some of them may genuinely believe that they've attained something. They may have understood something, but all this is, if you attend to some of the things that a lot of modern gurus say, they say all you need to understand is that all this is in awareness. And that if you understand that everything is in awareness, and you understand that you are that awareness in which all these things are happening, that's all you need to understand. That is liberation or jnana or whatever. This sort of superficial understanding is emphatically refuted by Bhagavan in these two paragraphs. According to Bhagavan, so long as we perceive the world, we don't perceive ourselves as we actually are. When we perceive ourselves as we actually are, we don't perceive the world. So why then is this idea of Jiva Mukti mentioned so often in ancient texts? It's because it is what seems to be true from the perspective of the ego, from the perspective of the Ajnani. We see Bhagavan as a person, and we believe Bhagavan is self-realized. So we think, he's a Jiva Mukta. Even while alive in the body as a 16-year-old boy, he attained self-realization, and for 54 years after that, he continued to live in that state of Jiva Mukti. And then finally his body passed away, and he was then in the state of Videha Mukti. This seems true from our perspective, but Bhagavan often emphasized all this is only from the perspective of the Ajnani, only from the perspective of the ego. Because from the perspective of the Jnani, the concept of a self-realized person is a contradiction in terms. So long as we experience ourselves as a person, we are not self-realized. When we are self-realized, we don't experience ourselves as a person. In fact, when we are self-realized in day by day in one place, I think in December 1945, so it was just a few months after the atom bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Bhagavan used the analogy of an atom bomb, but he said, when the atom bomb of jnana descends, it will destroy all the worlds, and like a spark in a heap of cotton, everything will be consumed because it's all based on the flimsy foundation of the ego. So when the atom bomb of jnana dawns, the ego will be destroyed, and along with it, all the crores of universes that we've seen in so many different dreams, they will all come to an end. So Bhagavan is, here in Nanya, Bhagavan is very, very, said this very unequivocally. When we are aware of ourselves as we actually are, we will not be aware of the world or anything, because all this is just a dream, and the dream exists only in the view of the ego. So when jnana dawns, the ego will be destroyed. That's why Bhagavan, in one verse in Uludunapadu Anubandham, Bhagavan compares the jnani to a person sleeping in a cart. Again, he's talking from our perspective, because we see the jnani as a body. So he said, just like a person sleeping in a cart, and the bullock cart, is not aware whether the cart is moving or is standing still or the bullocks have been unyoked, so also for the jnani who is sleeping in the body, that's in our view he's in the body, but not in his view, but he says it metaphorically, for the jnani who is sleeping in the body, he is unaware of the activity of the body, the sleep, or the nishta. Nishta means when Bhagavan seems to be, when we see Bhagavan sitting there, seems to be in samadhi, when he's in Patala Lingam, for example, unaware of the maggots and vermin eating his thighs. that is, he's in the state of Nishta. So for Bhagavan himself, he doesn't know the difference between that state or sleep or waking. Because for him, what is real is only pure self-awareness. Nothing else exists. So these, though it's very, very simple words Bhagavan says here, what the teachings he gives, these are the very, very deepest teachings that can be given in words. And they're much, much deeper than a lot of what is taught in Advaita text is actually superficial. It's for people who don't question deeply. But Shiva Prakashan Pillai was someone who questioned deeply, so Bhagavan gave him very deep answers. But it's important for us to understand this. It's not that we practice this and one day we'll be self-realized and then we'll be able to teach people or whatever. When we're self-realized, there'll be no one, we won't be there to teach them, there'll be no one there for us to teach. There'll only be what is always there, which is pure self-awareness. That is why the ultimate truth is what is called ajata. Ajata means nothing has ever happened, nothing has ever been born, nothing has ever come into existence. There never was any bondage, there never was anyone striving for liberation, there is no such thing as liberation. Nothing has ever come into existence. So this is the ultimate truth that Bhagavan is teaching us here. But it's up to us whether we're ready to accept it or not. For many of us, Bhagavan's teaching is actually very, very simple to understand, but for many of us, they're very, very difficult to accept. So it's up to us. Do we want to accept Bhagavan's teaching? If we accept Bhagavan's teachings, then we can go deep into following his path. But many people take little bits and pieces from Bhagavan's teaching, the things that they find palatable, and they like to ignore the unpalatable things. But the result is they have an incoherent understanding. If we want a coherent understanding of Bhagavan's teaching, we have to be ready to accept all these basic principles that he's teaching us in Nanya, Ulugunapadu and such texts.
In what sense is the self known if the mind is illusory?
It is not the mind that knows the self. The mind is the false awareness. Sometimes the mind is referred to as Chittabhasa. Chittabhasa means the semblance of awareness, or sometimes it's translated as reflection of awareness. When you see yourself in the mirror, you're not seeing yourself, you're seeing a likeness of yourself. So Chittabhasa means a likeness of awareness. It's what seems to be awareness, but it's not real awareness. Because the mind is the awareness that is aware of things other than itself, which is not real. Real awareness, according to Bhagavan, is pure awareness, awareness of nothing other than itself. So the very nature of, in verse 13 of Ulugunapadu, in the first sentence, Bhagavan says, Jnanamam tane me. That literally means oneself who is jnana. Jnana means knowledge or awareness. Oneself who is awareness alone is real. And then in the next sentence he says, Nanabam jnanam ajnanamam. That is, knowledge of multiplicity is ignorance. So long as we are aware of anything other than ourselves, so long as we are aware of any multiplicity, that is, according to Bhagavan, that is ignorance. That is not real awareness. That is only a semblance of awareness. So the very nature of ourself is pure self-awareness. In that sense, our real nature knows itself. But it's not knowing itself as an object. It's knowing itself because it is pure awareness. And awareness, we cannot be aware without being aware, I am aware. And by being aware that I am aware entails being aware that I am. So the very nature of pure awareness is self-awareness. But it's a knowledge or awareness quite unlike anything that the mind can conceive. Actually, according to Bhagavan, that pure self-awareness is what we experience in sleep. But from the perspective of the mind, sleep just seems to be a dark state, a state of, it's not very, I mean, because we didn't experience any phenomena there, it seems to be just a blank, emptiness. But according to Bhagavan, it is pure, beginningless, infinite Satchidananda. That is what we're experiencing in sleep. But that is something beyond the grasp of the mind, because the nature of the mind is to look outwards. Another thing Bhagavan is recorded in a couple of places in Day by Day, Bhagavan says, the same mind, when looking outwards, creates the world. The same mind, when looking inwards, is our real nature. So there's only one awareness. The real nature of that awareness is pure self-awareness. When it seems to turn outwards and be aware of other things, then it is called mind or ego. So this mind or ego can never know our real nature. But when the ego tries to know its real nature, when it withdraws its attention from everything else and focuses its entire attention on itself, in other words, when it turns 180 degrees away from all phenomena back towards itself, the one who is aware of phenomena, it dissolves back into that pure self-awareness. But once it's dissolved, what then remains is not, oh, I've attained liberation. It is, I have always been liberated. There never was any such thing as ego. That is why the ultimate truth is ajata.
Michael, you mentioned accepting this.
Yes.
If we're prepared to accept this. Is that something we can actually do, accept it? Because
well, we at least should be willing to accept. Obviously, the total acceptance is when we surrender ourselves completely and the ego is dissolved. I'm not talking about that level of acceptance, but at least at a theoretical level, we should be ready to accept these teachings of Bhagavan. Because only if we accept these basic principles of Bhagavan teachings will we be able to put them into practice correctly. People sometimes talk about, oh, that's all theory. But the theory and practice of Bhagavan's teachings are inseparable. The theory Bhagavan has taught us is understanding the theory is essential to putting it into practice. Because until we've understood the theory correctly, we cannot put it into practice, because we'll always be attending to some phenomena rather than to the one who is aware of phenomena. We have to understand, and the more we go deep into the practice, the more our mind will be purified, and the more clear Bhagavan's teachings will become to us. So by practicing, our understanding becomes deeper. By our understanding becoming deeper, we're able to go deeper into the practice. That's why it's artificial to separate the theory from the practice. Of course, we can just go on reading the words endlessly, if that's what people mean by. But we won't understand the words very deeply unless we put it into practice. And if we put it into practice, every time we come back to the words, it'll give us more clarity and enable us to go deeper within. That is why the path is from ancient times it is said the three components of the path are Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Sravana means hearing the truth. Literally means hearing, but it can also mean reading. So, in other words, learning from words. Manana means reflecting deeply, because if we read these words without thinking deeply about it, we'll have an inconsistent, we'll believe this and we'll also believe in the state of Jiva Mukti. We have to understand at what level each of these are in order to get a complete and coherent understanding of Bhagavan teaching. We first got to understand the fundamental principles, and then we can see where all the more superficial teaching, where they fit in place, and how they're not the ultimate. Once we get, so Manana is very important in order to understand properly. But most important of all is Nididhyasana. Nididhyasana literally means contemplation. In the context of Bhagavan's teaching, it means self-contemplation. In other words, being self-attentive. Because it is only by that practice of being self-attentive that we get the clarity for us to understand the deeper meaning of Bhagavan's words. Nowadays, it's quite popular among some of these modern gurus. They say, oh no, it's, if you're ripe enough, you just need, Sravana alone is sufficient. You just need to hear and you'll be enlightened. So come to my satsang, pay me $1,000 and listen to my words, and if you're lucky, if you're ready for it, you'll get enlightened. And if you don't get enlightened by the end of it, it means you're not ready for it. But I get my $1,000. I mean, this is what's happening. But that is a misunderstanding. Sravana can never be sufficient. There are some people, some very rare people. There was one disciple of Bhagavan called Tene Swami. Bhagavan said to him one word, Iru, which means be. And Bhagavan said it in a context. He came to Bhagavan to take permission to go to Pondicherry to apply for a job. And whereas Bhagavan would, if people came and said, Bhagavan, I'm going somewhere, Bhagavan would usually just nod his head. And usually to Tene Swami, Bhagavan said, Iru. And anyone sitting there would have thought Bhagavan's just saying, Iru means be. Also often it's used in the context of just, in the sense of just wait. So anyone there, if they'd noticed what Bhagavan said, would have thought Bhagavan is saying wait. But there was one person there, other than Tene Swami, who understood what Bhagavan really meant, which was be as you are. That person was Murugan. So Murugan is the only person who understood what happened on that day. By that one word, Bhagavan established Tene Swami in that state. But it's not just because of the Sravana, it's not just because Murugan heard that, I mean, Tene Swami heard that word. There were so many other people in the hall who also heard that word. He not only heard the word, he understood what it meant, that the manana was there automatically, and he turned his mind within and it merged within. So without the actual practice, no amount of hearing is going to be sufficient. When we have the maturity, just one word will be sufficient. Just the final spark to ignite the pile of cotton.
So what did he do, that guy? What did that man do? He just...
He didn't do anything. Bhagavan said be, so he followed what Bhagavan said. He lived for about more than 50 years after that. Most of the time he was just sitting on a tine. That's why he was called Tene Swami. Tine means a bench in the veranda of a house. In the same compound where Sadhuam was staying, the same family who were feeding Sadhuam. He used to come begging to their house, and one day he came and said, Amma, it's raining outside, can I come in? It was a bright sunny day, but so he came and he sat on the tine, and a few minutes after that a few drops of rain fell. And for the next 40 years or so he was just living on sitting on that tine, doing nothing.
You probably met that man.
Yes, I knew him. But sometimes he would say things which were intelligible, but most of the time he either wouldn't talk at all, or he would talk something that nobody could understand what he meant.
Did you know him?
Yes, yes.
And who looked after him and fed him? Who looked after him and fed
That
him?
family, the same family. They were devoted to Bhagavan.
Michael,
Yes.
I feel uncomfortable with this word accepting. I can understand being open and not rejecting and inquiring, but accepting seems to smack of like a blind faith.
No, it's not in that sense, because this is where manana comes in. We can logically explain all of Bhagavan's teachings. For example, actually Bhagavan's teachings are a challenge to all of us, because Bhagavan is asking us, Bhagavan's teachings are in effect asking us to question all our most fundamental beliefs. For example, we all believe, I am this body. We may say, oh, I understand I'm not the body, I'm something, but we have a deep-rooted conviction, I am this body. Bhagavan asks us to question that. We also have a deep-rooted conviction that this world is real. In fact, so long as we experience the body as I, we cannot but experience the world as if it were real. Because we are real. When we take the body to be I, the body seems to be real. Since the body seems to be real, and the body is part of this world, the whole world seems to be real. That's why when we're dreaming, the dream world, everything that's happening in the dream seems real so long as we're dreaming. Only when we wake up, that is when our identification with that dream body is broken, is severed, then we are able to recognize, oh, it was all my own mental projection. But so long as we're dreaming, it all seems real. So this all seems real so long as we experience this body as I. So in this way, we can, Bhagavan challenges us to, challenges our beliefs, but if we think deeply about what he says, we have no reason to believe that what he said is not true. But for example, generally we all believe that the world exists independent of our perception of it. But according to Bhagavan, nothing exists independent of our perception of it. Can any philosopher or scientist prove, or is it even theoretically possible to prove that anything exists independent of our perception of it? Obviously it's not. Because it's only when we perceive things that they seem to exist. When we don't perceive it, how to say that it exists? It's our belief our belief that the world exists when we're asleep, for example, that is a blind belief. So Bhagavan is asking us, is challenging all our most cherished beliefs and making us see that actually they're groundless beliefs.
But what I felt from what you said, it kind of almost smacked of
like religious.
This exclusivity.
Yes.
The Bhagavan's teachings are, I can't think of the word, but they're the real required, let's say. And it's kind of comparing them with other teachings.
Well,
and I feel very uncomfortable.
Okay, well, in a certain sense, there are many teachings. Even within Advaita, there are many teachings. Even within Bhagavan, even if you take talks, Bhagavan is talking at many different levels to different people. But we have to understand, teachings are given at different levels to suit different people. But Bhagavan has given us, the core of his teachings, what he's teaching us in Nanya, in Ulladu and such texts. These are the very, very core and deepest teachings. It doesn't mean the other teachings don't have their place in their own context. But if we want to go deep into this subject, if we want to go deep and really know what we actually are, we want the deepest teachings of all. I think Bhagavan's teaching.
The deepest teachings.
Yeah,
through inquiry, one can't sort of trust in it.
Yes, but as far as words is concerned, as far as within the limits of words, Bhagavan has given us the deepest teachings that can be given in words. It's up to us to actually assimilate those teachings and put them into practice. That is up to us. That is why I say, are we ready to accept it? If we're not ready to accept, even at a verbal level, what Bhagavan has said, even at a conceptual level, if we don't accept, we won't be able to go so deeply into their practice.
Well, I don't think it's a matter of accepting, it's more a matter of being open, of not rejecting.
Well, yes, it is. Because Bhagavan often used to say, don't believe what you don't know. So Bhagavan hasn't asked us to believe his teachings, but he has given us good reasons why we should investigate ourselves. Because if we think deeply about what Bhagavan has taught us, it is clear We now experience ourselves as I am this body. But if I were really this body, I couldn't be aware of myself without being aware of this body. But I'm aware of myself in dream without being aware of this body. Then I'm aware of myself as some other body. I'm aware of myself in sleep without being aware of any body at all. So I cannot be what I now seem to be. If we understand that, then we understand the need for us to investigate. And so all Bhagavan's teachings are pointing out the fallacy in all that we believe, all that we hold to be true, all that we hold most dear. So they're a challenge to us. So accepting it doesn't mean blindly, and what's the use? By believing Bhagavan's teachings, what's the use? Unless we put it into practice. And the practice is what? It's vichara. Vichara means investigation. So we need to investigate and find out what we actually are. So Bhagavan's teachings are impelling us towards investigation. And when I say accept, I mean accept that there is a compelling reason for us to investigate ourselves. And that if we're not investigating ourselves, we're wasting our life, basically. I mean, there's nothing more important than for us to investigate what we actually are. In that sense, I mean, yes.
Can I ask you? Day by day,
Yes.
Bhagavan is asked, is everything predetermined?
Yes.
And Devaraja Mudali are asking, and Bhagavan says, yes, all actions the body has to go through are predetermined,
Yes.
but you are free to go within.
Yes.
Does it mean everybody has that freedom, or it depends on the potential of each person?
Everyone is free to go down within.
Is it possible for a person who's not interested?
It is possible, but because they're not interested, they won't even try. We all have that freedom, but we may not use the freedom.
But he says for activities of the body are predetermined.
That is something that is often misunderstood. All prarabdha, our destiny, determines what we are to experience in this life. But even the note that he wrote to his mother, Bhagavan said, what is to happen will not stop. What is not to happen will not stop, however much effort one makes to obstruct it. What is not to happen will not happen, how much effort one makes to make it happen. So we have the freedom to try to experience things that we're not destined to experience, and to avoid things that we are destined to experience. We have that freedom. So some of our actions are driven by our free will. That is, those actions are agamya, and it's the fruit of those agamya that later get stored in sanchita and may later be experienced as prarabdha. So Bhagavan is not denying, but we have the freedom to make effort, to do things, but we don't have freedom to change what is destined to be experienced. That is what Bhagavan emphasizes there. People are this is a topic people ask endless questions about and have endless problems with. All this is taking interest in anatma, what is not ourself. No action is ourself. So the reason Bhagavan gave us these teachings is to help us turn within. If we are firmly convinced by what Bhagavan says, but whatever is to happen is going to happen anyway, we can't change it, we will make less effort to try and change things. And therefore we'll have more time and inclination to go within. So all these teachings, the reason Bhagavan gave those teachings is not for us to inquire deeply into what is prarabdha, what is agamya, which prevails, fate or free will. As Bhagavan says in verse 19 of Ulladu, this whole argument about which prevails, fate or free will, is for those who don't know the truth of the root of fate and free will, namely the ego. So what we have to investigate is the ego. Now in this ego we have a will. So we can't deny but we have a will. In fact, we generally, the term Bhagavan used in that Tamil verse is mati, which simply means will. It doesn't mean free will. Freedom is, the freedom of our will is implied there, but it's not actually stated. But nobody can deny that we have a will. We all have likes, dislikes, hopes, aspirations, desires, fears, attachment. This is all our will. So we all have a will, and that our will drives us to make effort. So we cannot totally deny free will, but at the same time, we don't always achieve what we want to achieve. Sometimes we may seem to. I study very hard, and I've got great ambition to get a PhD. So I study very hard, I get the PhD. We think, oh, because I studied so hard, I got the PhD. Therefore, by my free will, I was able to achieve that. It was because it was my destiny to get that PhD that my prarabdha drove me to make that effort to get that PhD. So many years of study. But I also wanted to have that PhD. So my free will and my destiny happened to be working hand in hand. But I also want to become a president of America because I think Trump is not doing a very good job. So I can try. I can go to America, get American citizenship. I can join the Democratic Party, but it's rather unlikely that I'll succeed. But I'm free to try. So if I don't succeed, it's because it wasn't in my prarabdha. If by some chance I do succeed, it was because it was in my prarabdha anyway. So there are many things we try for which we don't achieve. There are many things we try for which we do achieve. Those things which we do achieve, we achieve because they were anywhere in our prarabdha. We may have had a strong desire for it. At that time, our free will and our destiny happen to be working in sync. Many times they don't work in sync, and we don't achieve what we want. But let's not inquire too deeply into this. This is all we need know. The point is, there's no point in trying to make effort to change what is going to happen, because it's going to happen anyway. And there's no need to worry about, oh, what if I don't work, who's going to pay the bills and everything? If the bills are to be paid, the body, Bhagavan said, you're not free to either work or to renounce. The work you're destined to do, you means the body and mind, will be made to destiny. But you are not the body and mind, so why should you be concerned with what work the body and mind are doing? Turn your attention within. Try to know who you are. Separate yourself from this body and mind. That is what we're trying to achieve. Yes.
You see how to develop. The first part of the ego is the I thought. And then from there, mind develops.
Yes. Well, but the ego and I thought are just two terms for the same thing. That is the first thought of the mind, the root of the mind.
Is the I thought.
Yes.
So that is essentially is the basis of the ego.
No, that is the ego.
That is the ego.
Yeah.
Which then recognizes the body.
Yes. Well, it's not even then. That is when the ego rises, it rises as I am this body. So the projection of the body and the experience I am this body all occur simultaneously.
So but there is a point where the body hasn't yet got an ego, is it not?
No. But modern psychologists had their own understanding of their own way of judging whether there is an ego. But the ego is the subject, that which experiences everything else. So without the ego, there is nothing. So nothing precedes the ego. The ego is the first cause.
Right, but a very young child.
Yes.
Does it have an ego or doesn't it?
Is a very young child aware or not aware? If it's aware of anything...
It hasn't identified that awareness with the body yet, has it?
Well, no, it has. Because it is aware of it. Pure awareness has no center. But the awareness that is aware of itself as I am this body is centered in the body. That is the ego. So the body-centered awareness is the ego. So long as we're aware of a body or anything other than ourselves, because we're never aware of anything other than ourselves, except when we're aware of ourselves as I am this body.
Right. What about the dream state?
The dream, it's another body we project. It doesn't matter what body it is. This body we now experience as ourself is no more real than the body we experience as ourself in a dream. The ego rises projecting and grasping a body as I.
Right, but in deep sleep, none of that.
None of that, no,
Yes.
no.
You're sort of
Yeah. Without the ego there's nothing, just pure self-awareness. That's what remains in sleep.
right. So all three states, or two states, is a body.
Yes, yes.
Waking state and dream state.
Yes,
And therefore an ego.
yes. Because the ego is that which is aware of itself as I am this body, and which is consequently aware of things other than itself.
Right. So the ego projects what is.
Yes. What seems to be, not what is.
Right.
What?
Correct.
Yeah,
What is.
yeah.
So when the ego ceases to exist, the what is disappears.
Everything else disappears along with it, yes. Just as in sleep.
But that body can still function,
In whose view?
in my view, or a third party's view.
The third party exists in whose view?
It can only exist in my view.
Yes, in the view of the ego. Everything exists only in the view of the ego. Except for pure self-awareness, which is our real nature, everything else exists only in the view of the ego.
So Ramana had no audience. Ramana Maharshi had no audience.
No, his experience is I alone am.
What is?
His experience was I alone, or his experience is I alone am. For him there is no other. But we see him as a person, and as a person he seems to be aware of us as other. Why the person that we take to be Bhagavan had such all-embracing love? Why he had love for all creatures, for good people, for bad people, for all people? Why his love was so all-embracing? Because he didn't see anything as other than himself. In his view, there is only himself. So what we see as manyness, he sees as oneness. What we see as otherness, he sees as selfness, himself.
So the separation for him wasn't there.
No, there is only himself. And in himself there is no separation. Separation exists only in the view of the ego.
But he was still useful to us.
Yes, he is very useful to us. But why he is useful to us? Because though he appears in a human form, what he actually is our own reality. He is what is always shining in us as I. So the source of his teachings is ourself, our real self, our real nature. The pure self-awareness that we actually are. From that, I was just telling someone, once someone asked, Bhagavan, if you're not aware of all these things, then where do all these, we ask questions and you give answers, where do the answers come from? Bhagavan said the answer arises from the same source from which the question arises.
And we are seeing us.
Yes,
We see
but we see Bhagavan as other than us, don't we? That is because the nature of the ego is to see otherness. But why we're attracted to Bhagavan? What draws us to Bhagavan? Because of his all-embracing love. Because he loves us as himself. Because he is ourself. So if we want to know Bhagavan, we have to know ourselves. So long as we see Bhagavan as a person, we are not seeing him as he actually is.
So when he left the body,
He himself said, where can I go? What is there to leave? Because he is the all-pervading space of awareness in which all these things appear and disappear. So where is there for him to go?
it's like a soap bubble.
Well, yes. I mean, it is. He is the all-pervading space of pure awareness. Where is that to go? Everything that seems to exist only within that infinite space of self-awareness. He is that. And you are that. So he says, if you want to know me, know yourself.
Yes. Right, I'll stop here, thank you.
And what is and what is the purest love for? What the purest way to express love for Bhagavan is to turn our attention within, because he has very graciously appeared outwardly in human form to tell us what? To turn within. But even before he appeared in human form, and even long after that human form has gone, he is always shining in us as I. His reality is that which is shining in us as I, that pure self-awareness. So the real Ramana Bhakti is Swatma Bhakti, love for our own self, love to turn within and to be aware of ourself alone. That is the real Ramana Bhakti.
Yeah, but at some place he said that the ego of a sage is like a burnt rope. It doesn't have a sense of volition.
He says that for whom? For people who see him as a person with an ego. It's only in our view that he is a person. It's only in our view that he seems to have a mind and an ego. So because we see him as a mind, he said that mind is just like a burnt rope. It doesn't bind anything. But that is not the ultimate truth. That is a concession to our ignorance. A lot of things that Bhagavan said are a concession to our ignorance. Ultimately, his whole teachings are a concession to our ignorance, because in his experience there is no ego. But if he tells us there is no ego, how is that of any use to us? If he tells us you don't exist, there is only pure self-awareness, how is that useful for us? We have a problem. So he acknowledges our problem. He comes down to our level to acknowledge, yes, there is a problem. That problem is ego. The root of all problems is ego. The ego seems to exist so long as it is facing outwards, so long as it is attending to anything other than itself. But the nature of the ego is that it rises, Ahande undain, Urupatri undam, Urupatri nekam. Grasping form, it rises. Grasping form, it stands. Urupatri undu mihaongam. Grasping and feeding on form, it flourishes. What he means by grasping form is attending to anything other than itself, because he says it's Uruvatrapeya hande, formless phantom ego. So how does this formless phantom grasp anything? Only by attending to it. And anything it grasps, any form it grasps, that's any phenomena, is something other than it. So it's by attending to things other than itself, by facing outwards, in other words, but the ego seems to exist. If the ego, which is now facing outwards, turns to face within, it disappears, because it doesn't actually exist. It's a phantom that seems to exist only so long as we don't look at it. If we look at it, it's nowhere to be found.
But a child till it's about 1 year doesn't have an ego, but it's not aware that it is aware.
It does have an ego, The child is aware, isn't it? But from the time it's born, a child is aware. It may not be aware of things very clearly, but it may not be, its awareness of phenomena may be blurred. It may not clearly see the form of its mother, but very quickly it recognizes the mother, and it knows where milk is available. So what is that it that goes from a mother's breast to drink the milk? That is the ego. And that ego is experiencing itself as, I am this body, I am hungry, I want some milk. So it may not be, Bhagavan sometimes used to say about children, Bhagavan said, why people find young children so attractive? They look so innocent and so, Bhagavan said, because they haven't yet sprouted their horns. That means it's all in there. But whoever has been born as that child may look very innocent now, but later it may grow up to be God alone knows who. So because, in other words, the vasanas, they're there in seed form, they haven't yet sprouted. That's what Bhagavan said when he said they haven't yet sprouted their horns.
Michael, you said that, or quoted Bhagavan, or said that Bhagavan says, I alone am.
Yes.
Where do you say, did you actually say that?
So many places. As I quoted earlier, the first sentence of verse 13 of Uludunapadu, Jnanamam tane me. Jnanamam tane me means oneself who is jnana or awareness alone exists, alone is real. In Nanya, in the 7th paragraph, he says, Yatatmai Uludu Atma Swarupa Mondre. Yatatmai Uludu means that which actually exists, Atma Swarupa Mondre, is only Atma Swarupa.
And that means in English?
Atma Swarupa. Swarupa means, literally means own form. So it means the own form of oneself. In other words, the own form is the word Swarupa is used to mean the nature, the real nature. So our real nature, the word, but in English we talk about the self with a the and a capital S. In Tamil there's no capital letters and there's no article like the. Generally when Bhagavan's talking in Tamil, he uses the word tan. Tan simply means oneself. He uses the same word tan sometimes to mean ego, sometimes to mean our real nature. But both are ourself. The ego is what we seem to be, our real nature is what we actually are. So he uses the same word. There's a verse in Uludunapadu where in the same sentence he uses the word tan 3 or 4 times, referring to ego and to self. He says oneself, the source of oneself. So we have to understand from a context in what sense he's using that word tan. But when he wants to specify that he's referring to our real nature, the term he generally used was either Atma Swarupa, which means the real nature of oneself, or simply Swarupa, meaning implying one's real nature. So he says our real nature alone exists. That alone is real.
Which is, in English, I alone am.
Yes.
Sounds a bit different.
Well, it says, what does I refer to? I is a pronoun that refers to ourself, isn't it? So I alone am means ourself alone is. It's the same. But it's not the words that are important, it's what the words mean that is important. Bhagavan says the same thing in many different words, but they're all pointing to the same thing.
Yeah, I suppose it doesn't... I've always had a bit of a problem understanding exactly what Bhagavan means.
We all have a problem understanding what Bhagavan means. If we understood what Bhagavan meant, we wouldn't be here. It's because our understanding is still imperfect. If we really understood Bhagavan, we would be convinced by what he said. And if we were convinced by what he said, we wouldn't rise as this ego. It is because we haven't yet fully understood that we are still here, still struggling. But by practicing the path he has shown us more and more deeply, our clarity of understanding will increase. His words will become more and more meaningful to us. We won't be learning any more information. The same words there, same meaning, but the depth of meaning in it will be clearer to us. There's very little, Bhagavan sometimes, what I was going to say, there's very little for us to learn. The basic principles of Bhagavan's teachings are very, very simple. But they're very, very deep, and we understand now, a year later, after more practice, after more Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, the same words become more clear to us. In a way that we can't express in words, but it will become more and more clear to us. And Bhagavan said, here it's not a matter of learning, it's a matter of unlearning. We come to Bhagavan with so much knowledge, so much beliefs about so many things. Bhagavan is questioning all our beliefs. He's questioning our very existence as a person that we take ourselves to be. So we've got to unlearn all that we've learned. Because ultimately what is true, there's only one true thing that we know, and that is I am. Whatever else we know is untrue, ultimately.
Michael, you're telling about the practice, the Indian practice.
Yes.
So in practice, what I observed is that more we tend to give up, more we tend to surrender, our clarity of this theory becomes much clearer and clearer.
But because Atma Vichara and Atma Samapanam, that's self-investigation and self-surrender, they are inseparable.
Exactly.
Because when we are turning our attention back within, we have to let go of everything. Exactly. We have to let go of everything outside. Not only that, this ego seems to exist only so long as we're facing outwards. So when we give up facing outwards and turn within, the ego begins to dissolve. That is why Bhagavan said in Nanya, Anma chintane tabira, vera chintane ku, satrum idum kodamal, Apmanishta paranai irpade, tanne isanuku aripadam. Giving no room to the rising of, giving not even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than thought of oneself, Atmachintana, that means self-attentiveness, and thereby being Atmanishta paran, that means one who is firmly established as oneself, that is giving oneself to God. So, in other words, attending to ourself is giving ourself. Is giving ourself as the ego. And in verse 26, Bhagavan says, if the ego comes into existence, if the ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If the ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. The ego itself is everything. Adalal yaduidu nadale overall yabam and all. Therefore, know that investigating what it is, what this ego is giving up everything. So, Atma Vichara and Atma Samapanam, Bhagavan sometimes said there are two ways, either investigate or surrender. But that's like saying you can either have a coin with a head on it or a tail on it. Take your pick. It's the same coin. For people, some people describing it in one way appeals, some people describing it in another way appeals, but it's the same thing that is being described. Bhagavan taught only one path, And that one path, we can call it Atma Vichara, we can call it Atma Samapanam. Self-investigation or self-surrender. It's one and the same path in practice.
So in your view, do you think giving up has to happen first and then the turning inward happens second? Or the other way, turning inward happens first and then you give up the wrong?
What does Bhagavan say? Yadu idu nadale over the yabamena. Turning within is giving up everything. Giving up everything is turning within. I mean, the two are inseparable.
So which precedes which one?
No, which comes first, your nose or your nose? They're one and the same thing. They're inseparable.
So there's no harm in giving up something. Say I have accumulated pride, for example,
Yes.
of my achievements.
Yes.
Giving up my accumulation
Yes.
of this, then that leads to turning inward.
By giving up, no, well, not exactly. By giving up pride, by giving up anything other than ourselves, we are purifying our mind. But self-surrender is not giving up pride. Giving up pride is a necessary prerequisite, but it is self-surrender, Atma Samapanam. We have to give up ourself. The self we have to give up is the ego. So if I give up my pride, I am there to give up my pride. So who is that I who had that pride who has now given it up? So long as that I is still there, the self-surrender, surrender is only partial, and it's not self-surrender. Surrender of other things. We need to surrender ourselves. But only when we surrender ourselves are we surrendering everything. So giving up pride, there are a lot of things we need to give up. Our desires, our attachment, our pride, all these things we need to give up. That's part of the path. But we cannot give up any of these things completely until we give up the ego. You may think you've given up your pride, but something may happen to prick you and the pride will jump up again. Because so long as the ego is there, the desire, the attachment, the anger, the pride, all these defects are there in seed form in the ego. We cannot give up anything completely without giving up the root, which is the ego. That is why Bhagavan's whole teaching is focused on this ego. Arunachal mena hamenine pava ahatevararupai arunachal. Whether you take Arunachal Stuti Panchakam or you take Ulidunapatu or Nanya or whatever word, Bhagavan is talking only about one thing, getting rid of this ego. Because Bhagavan is the perfect doctor. He is not interested in the symptoms. He's only interested in the disease. If he gets rid of the disease, the symptoms will take care of themselves. The disease is ego. Everything else is symptom. Pride, desire, attachment, these are all symptoms. But the actual disease is ego. And what is ego? It's nothing but a wrong awareness of ourselves. And awareness of ourselves is something other than what we actually are. So how to get rid of the ego? Only by correct awareness of ourselves. By awareness of ourselves as we actually are. That's why Bhagavan's teachings are so simple. You cannot have a simpler teaching than Bhagavan's teaching. Our mind's complicated, but actually what Bhagavan has taught us is extremely simple. Yeah.
Our day-to-day life,
Yes.
okay, it's run by ego, right? But when you are going to give up ego, that's what our practice is. That's
Yes.
why we are all here to try to take that ego part out.
Yes.
When we try to do that, are we not also giving up our day-to-day responsibilities?
If you
you
give
have a goal, you have a family to take care of,
that,
all these worldly responsibilities, right?
that
But
is
when we do that, are we not, going
That-
to fail in life from...
that is why Bhagavan said, whatever is to happen is going to happen. The outside things, they're all taken care of by destiny. You are a passenger traveling on a train. If you say, it's my burden, this is my luggage, I have to carry it on my head, you're unnecessarily suffering. Why not you just put the luggage down? Whether you carry it on your head or on the seat beside you, if the train is carrying the luggage, isn't it?
Still, if you see, there is a government, there is a leader, there is a teacher, there is a doctor, still there are some effort we have to do, right? There is an ego that we...
Who has to do? The body and mind will do the work which they are born to do, but they are destined to do. Do you know Tamil?
Yeah.
In Bhagavan's note to his mother, the first sentence is Avarava prarabdha prakaram adakanavan angangirndu atuvipan. Avarava prarabdha means according to the Avarava prarabdha prakaram, according to the prarabdha of each person, adakanavan literally means he who is for that. That means, implies Bhagavan or God. Adakanavan, Angangirandu, being there. It means being in each place, being in the heart of each person. Artuvipan. Artuvipan means it will make them dance. Make it. So you will be made to do. If you are to look after your family, to provide for your family, who is the you who is to provide for your family? It's not actually you, it's the body and mind. The body and mind are what are working. That body and mind will be made to do whatever is necessary to provide for your family. But you cannot change that. What is not to happen will not happen. Endrum naduvadadu, envichikanum naduvadu. What is not going to happen is not going to happen, however much effort you make. Nadapadu entadeseinum niladu. That which is to happen is not going to stop, however much obstacle you make.
Efforts are driven by the ego, right?
No, there are two forces driving effort. One force is prarabdha. That is the fruit of the past efforts you've made have been stored, and in order for you to experience, let's say you were born in India, you're now in London. That took a certain effort to come here. You must have studied hard at school, got a job, got employed here. Something, I mean, I don't know, of course, some events would have happened in your life in order to bring you here. You feel you made effort to study hard at school and come here. But those efforts, because you were destined to come here, certain efforts you were made to do. Whether you liked it or not, you would have to do those efforts because it's your destiny. But at the same time, you've got so many desires of your own. You want to achieve a better life and this, that. So you're making your own effort. So the two forces are driving your effort. One is your destiny, prarabdha. The other is your will.
Desire.
Will. Desire means, but will is a more general term, because will includes the desire, the fear, the attachment, the likes, the dislikes, the whole thing. That is your will.
That will is nothing but the ego, right?
That is the ego's will, yes. It is the ego's destiny and the ego's will are both driving it, they're both driving the actions of body, speech and mind. We want to surrender our will to God, don't we? That is in the path of surrender, in any religion, whether Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, whatever religion, they talk about self-surrender, surrendering one's will to God. So we have to give up our will, but so long as we remain as an ego, we cannot completely give up our will. We have our likes and dislikes. So in order to give up our will, in order to surrender to God, to surrender our will to God's will, we have to surrender the ego itself. Because so long as the ego is there, it will have a will of its own. However much we try to surrender, there'll be certain things we find unpleasant, certain things we find pleasant. That is our will acting there.
No, that I can understand, but when you say that you are going to surrender your will or ego, okay, The question that arises is, what about the things that we have to do?
So the fact that you're concerned about the things that you have to do, that is your will is making, your will is making you concerned about these things. Bhagavan says, don't be concerned about these things. Surrender that to even that burden. You're saying, but my luggage has to reach Delhi. I'm on the train to Delhi, but I don't want to, if I put my luggage aside, it may not reach Delhi. So I've got to carry it on my head. Bhagavan says, you and your luggage are both on the train to Delhi. Put your luggage down beside you, travel comfortably to Delhi, you and your luggage will arrive in Delhi together at the appropriate time. So all that your body, speech and mind have to do, they will be made to do. If you are destined to look after your family, to provide for them, you will do it very well if you surrender yourself to Bhagavan. Even if you don't surrender yourself to Bhagavan, you'll still do it. But why to travel uncomfortably with the luggage on your head?
Does the self or the soul, what is it, has the preference or will or preference?
Sorry?
Does the self have a preference?
But if you mean by the self, if you mean your real nature, it has no will of its own. Its only will is infinite love. Because it alone exists, and its very nature is to love itself.
Infinite love means that you love everybody?
No, it means you love the only thing, yourself.
Yes.
So long as we see others, it's not perfect love. Perfect love is there when we see only the one reality.
Does the self see? Okay. I can experiment with self only to the ego, I suppose.
Yes. As the ego, we see other things. As in our real nature, we don't see anything. So long as we are seeing anything other than ourselves, we are ego.
Yes, but to experiment myself.
Yes.
Myself, I don't know if it's my.
Yeah.
To experiment myself, I need an ego.
Yes.
Experiment to experiment something.
Yes.
I need senses. And if I have senses, I have a body.
Well,
and I have an ego. I cannot sense the self. I cannot identify myself with myself. Myself with the big S. Without senses. That's why during the dreaming state, I don't experiment anything. Because I don't.
Yes, you do. Senses. You do. In dream, you're aware of the. Sleep. In sleep, yes. 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 It's not even the senses. It's the attention. It's by attention that we investigate ourselves, or we investigate other things. Scientists are investigating the world. They're using their attention. In order to investigate ourselves, we have to use our attention. Yes. In sleep, we cannot investigate either other things or ourselves because there is no attention. Why? Because attention is a selective use of our awareness. We're always aware, but only when we're aware of multiplicity can we choose to be aware of this rather than to be aware of that. I can attend to Bhagavan's picture, I can attend to the candle, I can attend to the book here, I can attend to the people sitting here. I have a choice. That choice is for the ego. That choice of what to attend to is for the ego. So it's only as the ego that we can investigate anything. As the ego we can investigate the world. As the ego we can investigate ourselves.
Why the self? Why the self comes to this world? Okay. Does it need an ego for what?
The self doesn't need anything. For the self, by the self you mean our real nature. For our real nature, there is no ego, there is no world. Because our real nature is pure self-awareness.
I don't understand. There is no word, is just too much, you know. It's not the word that I think is the word, that's okay. What I perceive is not the real word, but what it exists doesn't matter.
According to Bhagavan, what exists is only our real nature, which is pure self-awareness. Why is it pure self-awareness? Because it's aware of nothing other than itself. That is the reality. That alone actually exists. But now we seem to have risen as this ego and projected all this dream. And so we're aware of all this multiplicity. According to Bhagavan, this world or any other world, whether heaven, hell, world in dream or whatever it is, any world is a projection of the mind, which is an expansion of the ego. So the root of everything, of all phenomena, of any kind whatsoever, is the ego. Because all phenomena exist only in the view of the ego. You asked earlier why. Why is a wrong question. Because when people used to ask Bhagavan, why did this ego exist? Why did this ego come into existence in the first place? He would say, that is the one question that can never be answered. And so it's a wrong question to ask. Rather than, sometimes Bhagavan used to say, if people ask him like that, okay, first go and find this ego, bring it to me, and then I'll explain to you how it came into existence. The ego seems to exist only when we don't investigate it. If we investigate it, we'll find there was never any ego in the first place. When we there means the ego. When the ego investigates itself, it will be found that there's no such thing. And what remains is then what will always exist, which is just pure self-awareness.
So you are saying that what we perceive with our senses doesn't exist, and what we don't perceive with our senses, it exists.
No.
It's strange, but
No. Okay. But it's not a matter of our senses. Senses are only for external things. Do you need your senses to be aware of your thoughts? Senses are just the windows through which we perceive the world. What is important is not the senses, it's the awareness. When we are aware of things other than ourselves, we're not aware of ourselves as we actually are. So now our attention is facing outwards towards all these things. We have to turn our attention back 180 degrees to face ourselves alone. When we do so, we'll find there's no ego there. The ego will dissolve. What remains is just pure self-awareness. That is what we actually are. And that is not something that we're unaware of. Even now we're aware of ourselves. We're aware of our real nature, but superimposed on our real nature, all this awareness, our real nature is pure self-awareness. Superimposed on this pure self-awareness is awareness of all this phenomena, all this multiplicity. Remove the superimposition, what remains is what is always there. And all this superimposition, it exists in whose view? Only in the view of the ego. So we don't have to remove the world. Simply remove the ego and everything is removed.
Michael?
Yes?
I'm very new here, but
Right.
I'm curious, at what stage are you? Like, have you achieved to get rid of your...
I am at the same stage as you. We're all beginners on this path.
Okay.
When we advance, we'll be lost. We will.
And are we to accept this destiny like blindfolded? Because it seems as if our ego is the one that is causing all the problems. We should get rid of the ego and
Yes.
destiny take place. If we were to just follow a destiny, things would be too easy. There would be no purpose, and it seems as if, again, there is no point even to have a self.
Destiny means what we are to experience in this life. According to Bhagavan, it is already predestined. It's already decided.
Do you accept that blindfolded? Because he says that?
It's
How is it proven that?
okay. There are certain. This is not one of the essential aspects of Bhagavan teaching. This is a supplementary thing. This is something that nobody can prove. It cannot be proved. But we can understand why Bhagavan taught this. There's a very great advantage. So long as we are concerned about our external life, our mind will be going outwards. Our aim is to turn the mind within. So Bhagavan has assured us you don't have to concern yourself about the external life, because the external life is going on according to destiny. We don't have to believe that, we can't prove that, but if we accept that, it makes our life a lot easier, because we are trying to turn within. The less we are concerned about external things, the easier it will be to turn within. So there's a practical benefit in accepting what Bhagavan has taught us in this respect. If we don't want to accept it, nobody can prove it. Nobody can prove. But
We are not to be concerned about external things. We would just stay in bed and not get up at all.
no, because the same destiny will make you get up. If you're destined to work, you cannot stay in bed in the morning. You'll have to get up.
I'm destined to work because I've been told that this is what everyone has to do when they grow up. You have to go to work, and you go to work. Even if you don't want to go to work, you make yourself work, because what will everyone think of me if I don't go
Okay,
to work?
so you're concerned about what people will think of you. But
So it's what everyone else thinks about me, which is the external side. So that is what makes me get up.
supposing nobody had told you that you had to get up and work, how long would you stay in bed? You would get hungry after a day or two, wouldn't you? You would get up and go looking for food. So
There are people out there that become homeless and they lose purpose and they possibly do those things. They don't care about that, and they eventually don't even.
Well, yeah, I mean.
Or things like that. It's exactly the external forces that keep us in equilibrium, I guess. I think ignoring these external and making it all negative sounds.
It's not all negative. It's accepting what is. But there's so many. Even if we believe we have control, how much control do we have on our life? Very little. We didn't decide what sort of family we weren't born in some country where there's war or country where there's starvation. We were born in, all of us here were born in relatively favourable circumstances. And those favourable circumstances have moulded our life. So how much, nowadays people talk about being in control, but how much actually are we in control? Now, you may have a job, but how can you be sure? Your company may suddenly go bust or something, and you lose your job. And then you may be very well qualified, but you're just not able to get the work. So many things can happen. Things aren't under our control nearly as much as we like to think they are.
So at what point do you get worried that you're not getting another job and that you're running out of money?
Yeah,
Because if you say you shouldn't work because it's out of your hands, at what point does something actually change?
but
I might just start not being worried.
theoretically we can say you shouldn't worry, and ideally we shouldn't worry, but in practice we will worry, won't we?
And why is that? Is that because of the ego?
That is because of the ego, because the ego doesn't want to be homeless, the ego doesn't want to starve.